All right, folks, it is Friday, December the 13th, Friday the 13th on 2024. And of course, a lot of things are going on in the world and around the world. And we'll be talking about those on World Edition, seeing what folks have to say about a number of these stories. Macron ally Francois Bayrou appointed new French prime minister. So Macron names centrist Bayrou to be the new French prime minister, and definitely we'll see how this plays out in France. And definitely joyous Syrians gather for first Friday prayers since Assad regime's fall and everything, and Russia pushed Assad to flee Syria after concluding he'd lost the war. So definitely that's something going on as well. And Moscow has launched a huge attack on the energy infrastructure. Russia launched a massive attack on Ukraine with 93 missiles and 200 drones. So Russia targets Ukrainian infrastructure with a massive attack by cruise missiles and drones. So it looks like they are trying to batter Ukraine's embattled power grid. So that's something else going on as well. And dozens killed in Israeli strike on Gaza's Nazareth refugee camp. So Israel strike on a Gaza post office kills more than 30. So Palestinians are decrying the barbaric Israel strike on Gaza's Nazareth refugee camp. And UK intelligence identifies key Russian target after Assad's regime's fall in Syria. So Assad's fall humiliated Putin and could dent his global ambitions, according to some, and everything like that. And also, Iran faces its biggest crisis in decades after Assad's fall. But there are some folks, including some folks reporting from Herat, that says Israel should be cautious. So that's something else that we're seeing as well. And alleged Chinese spy with links to Prince Andrews has been banned from the UK. So, Chinese businessman with ties to disgraced Royal Prince Andrews is barred from UK over security concerns. So, there's definitely something going on as well. And Yoon Suk Yeol contrition to defiance ahead of a second impeachment vote. So, they're saying that there's an unimaginable situation there as South Korea endures fallout from the president's martial law efforts. So definitely looks like there's a power vacuum going on there as well. And we'll see how this all plays out. And apparently, in news from the world of nature, discovery of six rare Mekong giant catfish in Cambodia raises hope for that endangered species. So, six endangered Mekong giant catfish, one of the world's largest and rarest freshwater fish, were spotted in Cambodia. So, scientists make a stunning rediscovery after a creature thought to be extinct shows up at a fish market. They could disappear forever. So we'll definitely see if they found some more of what's going on in that space as well. So, like I said, there's lots going on around the world, including folks trying to figure out what will go on in Syria now that there is a new government there as well. So, Israel is even instructing its army to bolster its position inside of Syria. So, Defense Minister orders Israeli troops to prepare to spend winter on Mount Hermon. So definitely it looks like a lot's going on in there. And Secretary Blinken is having a meeting or had a meeting with Turkish President Erdogan. So Blinken makes an unannounced trip to Iraq as the international community grapples with the Syrian regime collapse. So definitely in Turkey, Blinken reports encouraging signs of a Gaza hostage truce deal is possible. So we'll see if this takes place or it doesn't. And the Bibi files with leaked Netanyahu footage can't be seen in Israel. And the folks that are wondering about this film because apparently Benjamin Netanyahu has been exposed in this riveting documentary, according to some. At least that's what the Financial Times is saying. So definitely be interesting to see what folks have to say about that as well. And definitely the Biden administration makes final diplomatic push for stability across a turbulent Mid-East. So we'll see if we can get some peace in that area as well. And Biden is readying travel bans on Georgia officials for undermining that October election. And speaking of rare things in nature, New Zealand scientists suspect specimen of world's rarest whale died from head injuries. So definitely that's something that folks are investigating as well. And NATO's Rutte wants a return to Cold War level military spending. So we'll see if we get that Cold War level military spending or what goes on in that space or how that all plays out as well. So, like I said, there's a lot taking place in the world, and a lot of people are paying attention to a number of world edition, world issues and seeing how they play out in the world and what's going on in terms of how they are being reported and what folks are finding out and all along those lines. And of course, there's a number of things happening in the United States as well. And so we'll definitely be having conversations about that to see what folks have to say about a number of these stories as well, because there's a lot going on in the US. And of course, folks are interested in that and are trying to figure out those stories as well. So, like I said, a lot's taking place in the world, and we'll be finding out what folks have to say about a number of these stories, including some, like I said, that I'll get to from the United States and all along those lines. So let me get to some of the U.S. stories, and then I'll bring in folks to see what they've got to say, including a shocking news from a old case and all along those lines. But we'll see what goes on. So a nonprofit leader and a social worker, those are some of the people that had their sentences commuted. So definitely there was even some folks that were slamming Biden for pardoning the kids for cash scandal judge. So definitely, but Marilyn Mosby, convicted of perjury and mortgage fraud, was not pardoned by President Biden. So there were some folks that were pardoned by President Biden. Who knows, some more pardons may be on their way and everything. So definitely January 6th defendants cling to Trump's pardon pledge as prosecutions roll on. So we're going to see maybe Trump will be pardoning some of them as well, and all along those lines. I did see a news report where even Trump himself might be pulling back on some of his pledges of being able to control grocery prices and all along those lines. And I think that I'd heard that in one of the recent interviews that he was that he's very much into the campaign mode usually. So now he's trying to figure out what he's going to do next. And apparently when asked what the future of the MAGA movement was, he didn't really have a answer according to what some of the reports were and all along those lines. So how MAGA will continue under the Trump presidency, that'll be interesting as well. So we'll see how this all plays out and what folks have to say about this as well. So a lot of folks are going to be paying attention to what's going on in that space. And in New York, a small plane crashed on a highway in Westchester County. One dead, one injured, according to New York State Police, and all along those lines. So, like I said, a lot's going on in the world. And like I said, Trump has just said groceries will be more affordable very soon. He's also said that might be very hard to achieve. So he said that Trump said reducing food prices will be very hard after he had made that campaign promise to cut the cost. So we're going to see how this all plays out and how long it takes him to cut the cost of groceries, since I know a lot of people are concerned about that. And U.S. charges 14 North Koreans in an $88 million identity theft and extortion case. So federal prosecutors in St. Louis indicted 14 in a remote IT scheme that funded North Korea. So definitely that's something that we're seeing as well. And right here in North Carolina GOP lawmakers override the veto of a bill to strip power from the incoming Democrat officials. So Stein and Cooper sue North Carolina Republicans over changes to the state highway patrol in the powers bill as well. So like I said, a lot's going on even right here where I'm at in North Carolina and all along those lines. So like I said, a lot's taking place in the world, and we'll be seeing what folks have to say about a number of these stories and what their thoughts are in that regards. I see I've got Lee Newton Rose with me, and I've got Rick Rosner as always, and everything. And we'll see if anybody else joins. I did have a quick question for you, Rick, and it wasn't one of the stories that I got to and everything. Sometimes there are people that admit that they did not that what they said wasn't true and everything. And even here, because it was part of the movement for police reform and also part of the movement around race. There was a young lady named Crystal Mangum, and she was had a case in 2006 that dealt with lacrosse and everything like that. It was the Duke lacrosse case. And now she was on a podcast, I think yesterday, and she said that she made it all up to validate herself. So she's hoping that the lacrosse players will forgive her and everything. But like I said, that was
that was a huge case. What, 18 years ago?
19 years ago. Yes.
And was she the only accuser?
I think there was one other one, but she was the primary accuser because they were all saying that there was a group of strippers, and I know you've worked in strip clubs before, that went to a private party, and she accused them of rape, and now she's had her own colorful past because
I'm sure she has no money, but
no, she's in prison right now because she's was accused of murdering. I think it was her husband or something like that. Not accused, but convicted of murdering. I believe it was her husband, if I remember correctly. So she's actually in the penal system. But yes, she got on somebody's podcast, I think it was yesterday, and said that she had made the whole thing.
It seems like at the very least she should be sued, but I don't know that the former lacrosse players, who have to be in their mid 40s now,
right,
are interested in revisiting it. But yeah, it's freaking terrible because it wrecked those guys' lives. I'm sure it damaged everybody associated with the university, and it undermines people who make legitimate accusations of rape. So yeah, it's freaking terrible.
Yep, no doubt about that. That's very.
So if you look at, I've looked at like studies that attempt to analyze the percentage of false accusations for rape versus false accusations for other crimes. And it's if you've been raped, it's hell to bring the accusation. I'd say more women don't than do because of what the victims go through. And so few, on a percentage basis, few women make false accusations.
Yeah, that's very true. They make very few make it, and there's that whole notion of victim blaming and everything like that. But like I said, this case was, in my mind, one of the ones that dealt with police reform, because definitely there were some folks that were wondering about the way that the case was administered and everything. And of course, the race issue played in it, as well as the accuser. I think both of the accusers were African American women, and definitely I think all of the lacrosse players were white lacrosse players and everything like that. So like I said, just the fact that she has come out some 19 years later and said, oops, I made it all up, is kind of interesting and everything like that.
Well, she's obviously an asshole. She's in prison for murder. So I mean, she's not the best person, obviously.
Not the best person at all. I think she kills back with us in the back, as is Leland Rose. We'll see if they've got comments, maybe even from the corner, or maybe they'll come on screen later on and everything. Another story that I saw that was interesting, and I thought about you, and I thought about even some of our other parents that are here on the network. So maybe that should be very interesting and all along those lines, and all in that space and that way. But there was not Travis Kelce, but Jason Kelce was on the news recently. And one of the things that Jason Kelce's wife started a new podcast. I like everybody starting podcasts these days and everything. And one of the things that she said is that childcare is handled by her, and when she's busy, and also that he doesn't do much childcare. So apparently, even when he is when she's out doing her work and everything, and he's at the home, she'd rather have somebody else tend to the child. So there were even people that were on the social media after she said this, basically saying that maybe she's raising multiple kids, the kids that they have together, as well as him as a 37-year-old. So how much do you think men should be responsible for helping in the childcare and all along those lines?
It depends. If you're a guy who's been playing professional football for almost 15 years, you probably have a net worth close to $100 million.
Mhm.
So if you choose not to do child care, you can afford it. For other families, it's a different situation.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was just interesting because that was all over social media and everything. I try to pull up what was said and everything, but it was just interesting because it was getting a lot of coverage and everything like that. And like I said, even on the international front, while I find that, I'll ask what I was talking to you about earlier. Could you forgive somebody, Adam or Shaquille, if you found out that later on they said that they did not do it? And I even said earlier that I know that that case played into both race relation conversations as well as conversations around police reform. The infamous case now, it's been infamous for a while, of the Duke lacrosse case. But I think it was yesterday, or it might have been a couple of days ago, that Crystal Mangum, who was one of the women that had done the stripping and had accused the lacrosse players of rape, has now come out and said that she made it all up, that she did not was not involved in the case, and that they did not attack her at all. And I know even in your case, Adam, I think you said that there have been people that have made accusations against you in stuff and it was falsified. So I could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, correct
Yeah,
me.
so I have been the subject of false allegations once in my life. It was extremely traumatic because when a woman makes false allegations, essentially the assumption is that you're guilty. And it was one of the most traumatic periods of my life. But ultimately, the truth did come out, and I thank God that it did. So could I forgive a person like that?
Mm-hmm. Because that's what she asked for.
I would say that if a person has truly recognized and is remorseful for their actions, I could forgive them, but I would not want to associate with them in any manner whatsoever ever again.
Yeah. What about you, Shaquille?
I was accused of a few things, and I wasn't even in the country at the time. So that was a pretty good defense. But forgive. I don't know. What are you forgiving? What's being asked? I think the person should be sentenced to the maximum amount that the person they were accusing would have faced, to be perfectly honest. So if you're asking me, would I forgive them and say, look, it's all just water under the bridge? No, I wouldn't. Would I forgive them so I can move on with my life? Sure, but I want nothing at all to do with that person and people that are associated with that person. That would be my personal view. And we've seen cases as well. I'll just focus on the US for the moment. We've seen the cases where, the person was sentenced to, 7 years, 10 years, things like that. Later on, it's turned out that the accuser was lying and made it all up. And in one case that I'm thinking of, she got sentenced to 10 months after he was in jail for years, and his mother actually died while he was in jail. I mean, how do you forgive that? That's not justice.
Yeah, and one thing I would say is, look, sexual abuse, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault, these are real problems in society, and they're certainly tragic and should be addressed, and the perpetrators of them should be strictly punished. However, there are instances in which there are false allegations, and on university campuses, the rules are often skewed against the one who is accused of the harassment, such that you cannot know the identity of your accuser. You cannot cross-examine your accuser. It's a preponderance of the evidence standard. And the people making the decisions are ones whose political and social views are so skewed to the left that a man essentially stands no chance. I was lucky because I was able to uncover documentary evidence that proved it was false. But the fact of the matter is many men get railroaded in their jobs. And the worst part about it is that women who make false allegations demean and denigrate the women who are, in fact, victims of these horrible, traumatic events, and that is a disservice to women.
Yeah,
well, Leland Rose, that's an
interesting
question, which is why is sexual assault such a prevalent problem and everything? So I don't know how prevalent it is, but if anybody's got any thoughts and everything, but that's something that Lee was asking.
Well, the answer to your question is power. That is the answer. When men are in positions of power, they often use that to sexually assault women. Hollywood is a perfect example. Harvey Weinstein is a perfect example. You're in a position of power. A woman wants a certain role in a movie. Guess what? So sexual assault and harassment is about power.
Well, hang on. I don't want to play devil's advocate here because I don't believe that women should be taken advantage of. However, if you're a young starlet and you've just got to be intimate with some fat, ugly old guy like Harvey Weinstein, but he's going to open up the doors for you and give you a big break and turn you into a big star that you've always wanted to be. Is that sexual assault, or is that somebody saying, what, it's worth it? I'll do that. I mean, if we talk about consenting adults and you talk about coercion, sometimes some women say, what, it's worth it. I mean, where do you draw the line?
Well, I agree with you.
What about Nicole? What's her name? Anna Nicole Smith, right? Anybody want to tell me that she was with that old guy because she loved him? I mean, what's the difference here? People take advantage of different people in different ways.
I agree with you. And I think the definition of it has been sometimes expanded too broadly. I'm talking more about the traditional types of actual, violations without consent.
Dan, Toby, just really quickly so y'all catch up. Part of what was going on was I was talking about a couple of podcasts that I heard, and one of them was, and you may have heard this, Toby, that Crystal Mangum, who was very famous for the Duke lacrosse case and everything, has now come out and said, oops, I made up that whole story. So she's basically come out on a podcast recently and said that did not take place and that she was trying to validate herself. That's the reason that she did that whole accusation against the Duke lacrosse players. And I did say that in my mind, there have been a number of issues around police kind of handling of cases, whether that's Mike Peterson, whether that was the lacrosse case, or a number of others, not just here, but around the world. And of course, there's been conversations around race and how race plays into discussions of crime and everything like that. In that case, the lacrosse case, which was way back in 2006, a lot of those issues focused on that, because I know that there was even conversations between Duke and Central and a number of other places. So it brought that issue to the forefront. So and I did say that she's had her own colorful history because she's now serving time in prison for murder. I believe it was murder of her husband, if I remember correctly, and everything. So that's where that conversation was going.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, false allegations cause problems for, as Adam pointed out, the bit that I heard, that it does harm real allegations, because then people begin to take that little nugget and then say, hey, this is the norm, but it's not the norm. Sexual assault happens, and Adam gave a great description about the issues with sexual assault and the reasons for it. It is a power thing. It is majorly about power, not sexual gratification at all. It's all about power and abuse. So yeah, I mean, Adam gave a great description about it. And again, yeah, the false allegations, the one false allegation begins to negate the thousands of sexual abuse issues, because people begin to say, well, the norm is the one, when it's not the one that's the norm.
How do you know that? How do you measure that?
Based on actual statistics and factual reports.
How would they get those statistics? I mean, most of the time, a lot of the time that these things are contested, and what we have seen a lot of is allegations that are being made when there's a custody dispute, after relationships broken down, things like that. We see a lot of those. So to say that it's not the norm, unfortunately, I don't think there's any way for us to be able to look at statistics and determine what's true and what's not.
There is. And what comes into play is when people try and justify and say, well, because this happened to this one person, that's really the norm. That's not what goes on. And then because of the situation of power that comes into play, for example, when we talk about Harvey Weinstein, who's in a position of power, who actually did sexually abuse and sexually assault people, him being able to use his power to shut down individuals coming at them. And then, for example, Jameis Winston right now is one of the folk heroes in the NFL due to the fact of his answers and his responses to particular questions. And people love Jameis Winston at this moment. But people forget that Jameis Winston also had a sexual assault case against him when he was in college at Florida State. And this is where the whole crab thing came from. Well, in that situation, because Jameis Winston was a powerful football player and had fans and followers, any individual who came out that said anything bad about him, what happens? They get shut down, they get attacked, they get abused themselves. So this is a reason why many women and many actual individuals, and this goes back to the power dichotomy that Adam spoke of. Any individual that comes after that individual or says anything about that individual gets attacked by the millions and thousands of followers and fans that they have.
But a powerful person accused of any crime is going to defend themselves quite vigorously, aren't they? I mean, forget about whether the person's famous. Even a person who's just powerful, a business leader, something like that, they're going to have a team of brilliant lawyers. They're going to, they're going to defend themselves very, very vigorously, and that can sometimes be quite vicious towards the person accusing them. But what is the person supposed to do if the person legitimately was accused falsely? The response that they're going to have is going to be indistinguishable, I would suggest, to the response of somebody who was actually properly accused. So how could you possibly tell? And what would you propose be the solution? The solution that we've gone with before is believe all women, Me Too, that sort of stuff. And whilst that has helped a lot of women come out and talk about the things that have happened to them, it has also increased in some circumstances the potential for abuse by people who want to make false allegations.
I'll let Rich and Adam go.
So I looked up the statistics because you have three trends in reporting of rape that are working versus each other. First, you've got a local peak in 1992 of reports of rape, which goes along with crime. Crime hit a peak in the early 90s and has been declining since then. So you got a local peak in 92, 110,000 reported rapes. And by 2012, it's down to 85,000. And then Me Too kicks in. And by 2017, you've got 145,000 reported rapes in the US. But now, like, people, I think, are having less sex in general. And by 2022, the number of reported rapes is down to 125,000. So you got a bunch of shit working against each other.
Yeah.
Right. And in response to Shaq's comment, I think the solution is this. The way to distinguish false allegations from legitimate ones, and therefore to prevent blowback against women who actually have suffered the trauma of sexual assault, is to have procedures in place that are sufficiently rigorous so that you can have a more reasonable chance of getting to the truth. So on a university campus right now, that's not the case. Imagine a woman making an allegation against a professor that they were sexually harassed. You can't know the identity of the person. You cannot have a hearing where you cross-examine them. You are suspended, and then you're sitting in an office with two women with a sign behind them that says, "Believe all women," who are the investigators and the fact finders. There is no chance that the truth will come out and the professor will be railroaded. The only time the truth comes out is when you hire an attorney and threaten legal action, and you have the benefit of documentary evidence that proves it was false. The lack of procedures on campuses and other contexts is a real travesty, and ultimately hurts women who have been legitimately assaulted.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Dan hasn't had a chance yet to say anything.
Yeah, chime in, Dan, if you want to chime in on this discussion.
I think, no, the real problem, I believe the real problem is that women who have been abused, and I mean legitimately abused, need to be able to not be afraid to report the assault, the abuse, whatever it happens to be, because it's wrong to abuse women, right? And we all agree on that. Mm-hmm. The problem is the standard of proof, all the things that go into determining and defending and or prosecuting those kinds of cases, because it's sort of he said, she said, and it's really hard to get to the truth unless there's forensic evidence or some sort of, rape kit, lab test. But even if there's a rape kit, it shows that there's been penetration. The question is, was it consensual or was it not? The problem is that everyone's entitled to due process, right, under the Constitution of the United States. That's true on campus. That's true off campus. The pendulum has swung one way and somehow needs to swing back towards a more reasonable center without jeopardizing the opportunity for women to be able to have redress in the event that there's sexual abuse or that kind of thing.
I have one more statistic to share, which is I compared rape statistics to murder statistics. And over time, for every murder or negligent homicide, non-negligent manslaughter case, there are about 5 rapes reported. So, which makes it kind of sense that,
And just another statistic to add on to you. If you look it up, false allegation reports, there's only between 2 to 8% of false allegations that come to play. Also, you've got to remember that when just in that same scenario that Adam played out perfectly, where that individual is not named and so on and so forth that made that allegation, having that individual that made that allegation relive the trauma in that same situation is the same thing that individual sitting, that professor that you're saying is having 2 people sit behind them. So you're having this woman or this man, because men do get raped as well. Not as many in comparison to the amount of women that get sexually abused. But again, that is true. So again, we talk about the power dichotomy. We're in a patriarchy society, so therefore there are more men in power than there are women. That means that statistically speaking, yes, more women get raped and sexually abused than men because more men are in power in comparison to women. So getting back to the point, yes, you're having that individual relive that abuse and then that traumatic situation because that person in power isn't in that traumatic situation. Therefore, that individual who does not get the opportunity or is put in that reliving of this trauma in a situation where they're not going to believe about this trauma. So that's why also a lot of individuals don't report those situations of sexual abuse until later, until they're able to handle that situation of sexual abuse.
I want to go back to what Adam was talking about. So campus, one thing you go to college for, no, it's not part of the curriculum, but to learn how to interact and have sex and with you got a bunch of people in their, from 19 to 25 years old learning how to interact with each other, which includes how to negotiate sex, how to, hook up and, without committing rape. Hold on. So colleges need to be less sloppy about they need to be more rigorous in how they, more similar to how, a good police department would investigate rape, because colleges are where a lot of sexual incidents are going to happen.
I agree with you, but like Dan said, the pendulum has swung too far. So on college campuses, one of the most common reasons a woman will accuse a professor of sexual harassment as assault is because they got a bad grade in a class, or not selected for an executive position in a certain organization. They weaponize that, and then in response to that, the procedures, including under Title IX, are so skewed in favor of the woman. Like I said, we want all women to come forward we want them to be protected, but we also need reliable processes to test the truth, such as a standard higher than preponderance of the evidence, more neutral fact finders, appellate review, the ability to cross-examine, the ability to have a hearing. None of that exists. And when you're sitting in a room with 2 women staring at you, and there's a sign behind it that says, "Believe all women," that is not due process. That is the antithesis of due process and a prescription for injustice.
But Adam,
so I think that there is an issue with, really, can I have a go at some point?
Go. I had stopped.
So I think part of the issue is that prosecutions have a very, very low success rate when it comes to sexual assault cases. The reason for that is, as Dan highlighted, it comes down to a question of consent. And how do you convict somebody beyond a reasonable doubt of there being a lack of consent in circumstances where the details may be very, very hazy? Now, oftentimes, Toby points out, sometimes people don't want to go through the trauma of reliving it, so they may not report it for quite some time. That, of course, leaves a person in a position of saying, well, you were accused of doing something 5 years ago. What's your defense? And so I think it's a very difficult thing to balance. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the defendant has a right to due process and has a right to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So even if there is a preponderance of evidence, really it has to be that this is what happened to the exclusion of all other reasonable possibilities. I just want to come back a little bit on I'll start with Rick. So you made the comment about college kids. What we're saying is that college kids today are having substantially less sex. And one of the reasons why, when they're polled, is that the boys, not the girls, the young men, are too afraid to do anything, because we have seen policies that have been interpreted by young men, and they talk about this, where they say, look, if I ask a girl out and she says no, or she doesn't think I'm attractive, I'm a creeper. We've seen TikTok videos where a guy's like at the gym and he looks over at some girl and all of a sudden she blasts his face all over the internet just for looking at her, right? So there are a lot of guys who have talked about this, and they're largely ignored when they say, look, it's just not worth the risk. We're not going to do it, right? And to Jatovi's point that, 2 to 8%, I think is what you said, of these allegations are false. Again, how would we know that? Clearly, in the case that Mark referenced before, somebody was I'm not overly familiar with the case, but somebody was convicted of this offence and served time in prison. Up until this person now recanting her previous statements, this would have fallen into the category of something that did in fact happen. So I'm not asking about how many people are let off or there's an unsuccessful prosecution or whatever. How would you ever be able to determine the percentage of cases that are actually false? And I would also say in the same way that I often hear this statistic thrown around that 90% of rapes go unreported, or 95% or 80% or whatever number you come up with. Again, how would you collate that number? Okay. So I'm not saying the statistic doesn't exist. I'm simply saying that the basis for those numbers, I think, are largely based on guesses and assumptions rather than concrete.
So people try to structure studies to pin down these numbers, and I've looked at enough of them to know that the numbers are kind of all over the place, because it is hard to pin down. With murder, you've got a body.
So just to point out again, Adam, we'll go back in time on what you just brought up, because you brought up a few things. Shaq, in terms of the numbers, just what Rick pointed out, that's what they do. There is a sexual assault that's been reported. They study these things of those sexual assault cases. They find out which cases are true and which cases are false. That is a body. That is a study. So then when you're talking about false allegations, that is something that actually happens, and they're actually able to put a number across those. There is a body that they are studying, so therefore they're able to get those numbers. False allegations.
I am saying those numbers are calculated incorrectly.
They are studied, just as I just put up a website that pointed out they did a 10-year period of 136 sexual assault reported over a 10-year period. 5.9% are coded as false allegations. So they're able to study these things and look at all these allegations, so they can come up with these numbers. So
yeah, but you can't apply that across all sexual assault allegations across the country. That is a very, very flawed methodology.
Small sample.
So again, you ask for how they come up with it. They do it the same way they do murders and everything else. So in terms of, you brought up a number of other things, but I want to get back to what Adam, because we went back to the analogy. Adam, in that same analogy, that same professor who has those two individuals behind him, because again, it's a situation of power. There are about 30 behind the individual who's unnamed, who, if they come out, are going to have 30 people coming at them. It gets down to the essence of the point that we're talking about, which is what Dan brought up. He said, she said. Once you get down to that, he said, she said, and you're in a position of power, who are people going to listen to in that position of power? They're going to give more lenience to the individual who has power, money, fame. They're not going to give any lenience to the individual who doesn't have power.
What I was referring to,
as Terry McCabe has just put in there, DAs don't want to prosecute it because it's very, very difficult to prove. But that really is the issue at the heart of it, is how do you solve it?
Close out my point. So my point being, if we are all in agreement that it comes down to the he said, she said point, in every situation of our lives, more lenience is given to the person of fame, regardless of it being male or female. Person of fame or person of more power is given more lenience. So even in the sexual assault, which we agree is a power dichotomy,
and what would you propose would be the solution to that, Jacoby?
What is the solution?
Well,
it's more complex than what we're actually giving credence to right now.
Jacoby, I think when you were saying about the 2 women and the 30, what I was referring to is the processes by which you determine which allegations are fake and not. When I'm being interviewed by 2 people with a sign in their office that says "Believe all women," you can bet that that is not a fair investigation. When it's a preponderance of the evidence standard, when there's no hearing or cross-examination. And let me be clear. A public letter of exoneration does not undo the harm. The mere making of the allegation has so many ancillary effects on your reputation that you almost can never recover. So that when you walk on campus, okay, if you're having a meeting in your office hours with a female student, people are raising their eyebrows and scrutinizing everything you do, even though everything you were accused of was false. It's wrong.
I am not disagreeing with what you just stated.
Okay.
I'm just stating that we are arguing that the outlier is the norm, which is untrue. We are steady going on the fact that
that's correct.
Yes, the outlier is the outlier. It is not the norm.
All right, so
what I'm saying is that you don't have the evidence to back that up because the methodology that's being used to come up with those statistics is extremely flawed. The other thing that you stated before was that men. Okay, you've said I was wrong. If I can finish. Okay, you've said that. Let me finish my. Okay, thank you.
Let me
finish.
Check and then Rick.
It was actually Rick first, but
yeah. So let me talk about
I'm halfway through a bloody sentence, and I was cut off by you saying that I was wrong 3 times.
Quit going around in frickin' circles, and let's get to new stuff.
Yes.
Jack, did you have a point if you want to make? Because I was going to ask him the question.
Hold on. Now let me freaking talk. I want to talk about the history of sexual pendulum on campuses with regard to rape, because this argument has been made for. Now, Adam has direct experience with this since he's on campus, since he's been party to various stuff. But the pendulum stuff, like, maybe achieved a peak in prominence in 2014 with Mattress Girl on the Columbia campus. This lunatic girl in 2014 to publicize that she said she'd been raped and it wasn't being handled properly, took to walking around to all her classes all day on campus with a mattress on her back. And she was eventually revealed to mostly be a lunatic whose charges were not substantiated. And, the guy who she was accusing, he got railroaded off of campus. And you would think that was 10 years ago. And then when Betsy DeVos came in as, running the Department of Education under Trump, she changed the rules on campus on how campuses deal with rape to make sure that, the guy isn't railroaded. So I don't know where it stands now, but all this stuff was going on 7 and 10 years ago. And I would hope, though, that might be a
Biden reversed it.
okay. So
So,
are we
one of the
still
things
in
that
the crappy era of campuses just being sloppy with this?
So one of the things that was stated earlier was that women get raped more than men. That is not true at all once you account for those people that are incarcerated. In fact, men incarcerated are raped at significantly higher rates, and once that's accounted for, it actually is more, I believe, per capita amongst everybody. So there are significant issues there. There are significant underreporting levels that go on in that space. But again, it's very hard to determine what's been not reported, because the best they can do is use similar methodology that's being used here to come up with things. The other thing, I remember there was a case around 20 years ago, and either Dan or Adam will be able to fill me in on the law. There was a case where some frat boys had hired a working girl to come to their what do you call it, just dorm, sorority, whatever you call it, frat house. And they had actually recorded themselves doing all sorts of things to this woman. Now, she reported it, and what actually happened was they were found not guilty, but the laws, and I think it's something like the Sunshine Laws or Sunset Laws or something like that, meant that because there was no conviction, everything could be released to the public, including these videos. And I remember it actually being on one of our television stations here in Australia, and we actually got to see, granted there was obviously body parts were censored, but we actually got to see all those videos. I remember I was in my early 20s when I saw that. Now, I think that's the sort of thing that perhaps Terry McCain and other women would talk about when they say women get shamed. Why would you take that risk? You might sit there and go, look, there's a real risk that that the person's not going to get convicted. I'm going to have to go through this whole headache and trauma, and then I could actually be further victimized if they say that what happened to me doesn't technically conform to rape laws. So, look, I think it's a really serious issue, and as I said, I don't know how to solve it, but I think that the believe all women, no matter what, that's perhaps not the right way to do it.
Shaquille, by the way, that was the case I was referring to, if I remember correctly, because that was the Mangum case and the lacrosse case, and that's been out there and that's been on video. So that's literally the case that you're talking about with the video and everything. And she even said that part of the reason that she lied in this latest podcast is that she was trying to be validated because she wanted validation and all along those lines. So that is the same case.
Yeah, it's the same case.
Well, it could be a different case that I saw. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I'm sure that this is not unique.
So just to point out, as much as you want to try and gaslight and say that men are raped more than women, that is untrue. Women are still raped more than men. That it is factually proven. Statistically, it's done.
It's not at all, Toby, because there's underreporting that goes on. This is ridiculous.
Get back to Rick's point, because that's the changing of the conversation, and we don't need to go round.
Why say I'm gaslighting? Boys going to Catholic churches is something that you've brought up on previous shows. Boys in Cub Scouts, something you've brought up in previous shows.
I let you finish. So just to get back to
Thank you.
Just to get back to Rick's point, how and Adam, I think you said the same thing about how to fix it. And I think the fix isn't the idea that we cannot believe women, because that is the same thing as that pendulum. That is what you're talking about. I think it is a societal problem where we are not able to accept that somebody makes a mistake or that there is an apology. That is something that we have to change as a society. If somebody, for example, and this is analogous, but it's not as egregious. But for example, when somebody makes a false allegation about somebody robbing somebody, but then they get proven not guilty or exonerated, but that story that is written about them is not seen as much or even accepted, because they're still seen as a murderer, a robber, or whatever took place. So I don't think that it is mainly I don't think it's the idea that we cannot believe the women. I think it's the idea that our society is unable to accept that a mistake has happened and that we can accept that mistake was untrue. So
There's
therefore,
a difference between believing women and simply having a woman say something being enough evidence to convict somebody and take away their freedom, right? And this is the problem with the law when it's applied to a criminal case, is that for somebody to be convicted, they have to be convicted beyond reasonable doubt. So if society wants to believe all women, that's fine. But believing all women also implies that you are not going to believe all men when men say it didn't happen.
the reason I apologize. Go ahead, Rick.
So one problem in pinning down statistics is the various studies use various definitions of what sexual assault, sexual harassment, and rape are. For instance, if you look at the accusations against Trump, a couple dozen women have accused Trump of sexual aggression, but it ranges from stuff like one woman says she was dancing on a table in the 90s in some New York club and Trump was looking up her skirt. And that's a very different offense than freaking rape. And then when guys are raped,
Not even a offense, surely.
hold on. When guys are raped, it's sometimes often like the most famous cases are like with a high school football team where as part of hazing, guys put something in another guy's butt, which is a very different, it's not, it's a sexual assault because it involves the guy's butthole, but it's not the same kind of, it's a very different thing.
Well, Rick, if the situation was reversed, reversed and, guys were doing that to a girl, right, would you say that that doesn't really rise to sexual assault? I mean,
no, I'm just saying
what is happening with young men, and all men actually, what is happening is that when they go through something like this, especially when it's forcible, right, they are often way too humiliated to actually report it. And when you actually look at the statistics of cases that have been prosecuted successfully, okay, and you actually hear about males that say that they were sexually assaulted by females, the battle that they've got to go through, the uphill battle that they've got to go through, I would dare suggest would mean that most men are going to look at this and say, you know what, this woman has done something to me. Maybe she's very attractive and nobody's going to believe me if I say that she did something to me. Okay. Now, look, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to diminish what women go through. I think that we have a serious issue. I'm not trying to diminish that at all. What I'm saying is that the solutions are very, very complicated. And to distill it down to, let's just believe all women,
what are your
way more
thoughts?
complicated than that.
Well, I think
in college, I had a girlfriend who
I don't have thoughts.
who would hit me. And,
No,
hold on. And at the time, it bugged me. And then one time I hit her back, and then I quickly drove to the police station and reported what happened. So it would be more a he said, she said instead of a she said, he said. But now looking back, I think it's because I was lucky. It was all stupid, and I consider it kind of hilarious and just evidence of how stupid I was in college and how stupid.
Yeah, but do young people? Does a young person who has exactly the same experience as what you just had and what you've just described that you're saying is funny? Would a young person today have the same experience as you? Probably not. The treatment that they would get would be like much, much different. And I think that a big part of society would not dismiss it as being funny, but would say, "Oh, this is really serious. It's a serious allegation. They shouldn't be able to graduate from."
I was laughed out of the police station because I knew.
Dan, since you've been in academia longer than I have, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Dan.
Okay, we've watched this whole phenomenon develop over the last number of decades, right? The situations are very, very different when you have a famous person versus a person that is trying out for a part or whatever, or a sports figure. That's a very different kind of situation. The analysis would probably be different. We see the fellow that was the quarterback of the Texans who had like 11 women who came after him. We don't know how many women are going after him just to get a settlement, for money. Who are the ones that just have a legitimate? We see the bimbo that was involved with Donald Trump and, the extortion and all the things that she tried to do. And so, I see Jacoby's weird face. But here, there has to be a balance because there are rapists on campuses, people who do prey on young women, and they need to be stopped. They're predators. Anyone that's a predator needs to be stopped, whether it's Harvey Weinstein or whatever. The standards in society are changing. Back in the 70s, Weinstein did this all the time. A lot of the producers and everybody in Hollywood did it. The couch test was always part of the test. Unfortunately, standards have changed a lot, and rightly so. Women should be protected.
So what does that mean, though, Dan? Let me just ask you something here, right? So, say you've got a very, very successful, wealthy person, and I'll leave Hollywood out of it because there's a lot more allegations in Hollywood. But just say this in general life: you've got a very, very wealthy, very, very powerful person, influential person who's single, right? And they want to date somebody, and there's a waitress or a server, whatever you call them over there, or a flight attendant, or somebody who's not anywhere near their level. How would that person go about expressing interest in that person without running the risk that could be, sexual harassment?
I guess
if you're
in an
to go to the
NDA,
Hollywood
I don't know.
example, to go to the Hollywood example, if you're a director or a producer of an upcoming film, and there's a gorgeous girl that comes in, and you're looking at her and you think, oh my God, she's amazing, and you really like her personality, how exactly would you go about asking that person if she's interested in you, given that
You
there's
wouldn't.
a power dynamic?
You
Well,
wouldn't.
exactly. You wouldn't.
No.
Is that what we want, though? Because if you look back in the past, there's been plenty of times when high-profile people have actually had an imbalance in power and have had long-lasting relationships that have been very, very loving. What do you do?
It's
Okay.
easy. The problem
My
is
question, Toby, was to Dan.
oh, okay. I could answer the question. Dan said, I don't know.
No, I didn't say I don't know.
Oh, my apologies. Go ahead, Dan. Answer the question then.
I think that people in positions of power have additional responsibility with respect to other people. And it's like an employer and employee, right? Employers should be very careful about making advances against anyone that work for them that are female, because of the power relationship, as Joby said. You don't want to create.
Essentially, you can only date people in your own class, right? If that's the case.
So there can't be an appearance of impropriety. That's the whole idea. That's what creates all these problems, is this appearance of impropriety. The sexual assault person on campus who's the creep, that's clear, right? But men who are in positions of power, teachers, others, have to be extremely careful in those relationships, because of the possibility they can be accused falsely or otherwise. And that's just up to them to use their professional judgment and discretion with respect to these people, and realizing.
But that's what's happening, right? And women are complaining about it. Look at, for example, the Johnny Depp case with Amber Heard. Forget about the allegations that were made later. You look at that case. There was, but they had to meet at some point, right? Now, when they met, she was a hopeful starlet, and he's a powerful, influential superstar, right? Even amongst people who are already both famous. What's the name from Ally McBeal? Callista Flockhart, and what's his name? Mental blank his name for a second. Harrison Ford, right? There's an imbalance there. Ellen DeGeneres and Rosie Porter. There's an imbalance there, right? But these people meet because they're in the same industry. What I'm suggesting is that if the people at the top of the industry are not allowed to date down, well, what are they supposed to do? Only date in their own class? It becomes very complicated to do that.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, the point you were making is the perception of impropriety is what you were stating, where basically you don't date somebody that works for you or that is a student of yours. That is where that problem comes into play. You can, if you're at, say, a professor at UCLA dating somebody way over at the the College of Richmond is different than dating somebody at UCLA. You're in a different. It's a different.
So a 50-year-old professor at UCLA should be able to date somebody from USC, a junior at USC. Is that what you're saying?
What the point is that if somebody is working for you, or if somebody is at that same school as you, don't go out and try and date them, because you're already putting yourself in a very precarious position where people will look at you in that incorrect manner. And if something
you feel as though it would be less precarious for a professor at UCLA to date a 20-year-old at USC?
The answer to that question is yes. And what I would tell professors across the country is, don't ever, ever, ever date a student. Do not meet with a student in your office with the door closed, because anything that you do that could even give an inclination of impropriety will cause you problems.
Yep.
But Adam, if we're talking about false allegations, it wouldn't matter if your door was open, because you would then have to try to put on an affirmative defense to say, hey, my door was open. She says it's closed, and it happened
Correct.
5 years ago. What are you going to do?
That's correct.
But that's what I'm saying. It's an impossible position. It's impossible for the victims of rape, and it's impossible for those people that have been falsely accused.
Yes, and I was in that position. I can agree with that. Yeah.
Rick, did you have a final thought you want to make? Otherwise, we're going to
Well,
wrap up.
a couple things. One is that I've made myself somewhat immune to allegations of rape because I just stay home all day and I don't interact with anybody. And for decades, I've talked about how my penis doesn't work very well. So for somebody, that, and okay, now a legitimate point.
I don't believe you, Rick.
Okay,
Rick, the same company that gave you the vaccines, I think, has a treatment for that.
Because I've been.
They could claim an attack with a dead weapon.
But we're less of a rape society than we were 50 years ago. You get a hold of an old issue of Playboy magazine from the 60s. About a third of the jokes in there involve tricking or coercing a woman into sex. It's crazy how rapey we used to be. And yeah, we're still pretty rapey, but much less so.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, Rick, when Rick can hold his own with women, which is usually what they tell him to do.
On that note, we're
Rick, can I assume though that you'd be very upset at the financial abuse that men suffer at the hands of women that try to trick them and
well, that's a rarity in the NBA. That according to what I've read is that in the NBA, rookies are taught by NBA veterans how not to be victimized by possible predatory groupies.
Exactly, but that's the whole thing. That's what I keep saying. What are these people supposed to do? You're famous, you're rich, right? You meet a girl from like just a normal girl. You try dating her. All of a sudden, you roll up in your Ferrari. You buy her some nice jewelry. You live in a big mansion, and then there's a power dynamic. What are you going to do? Like it's an impossible scenario, and that's if you're having a long-term relationship. So when you're at the club and you just meet some girl, like, oh hey, come back to my crib, and then an allegation's made. What are these guys supposed to do? It's a very dangerous situation.
Is to enjoy sex like you enjoy steak. Very rare.
Just tell me what you have to say. You're in that space. You're in that sports.
Adam, that's why the birth rate's so low.
Shaq, you keep asking the same question. And you're not accepting of the impropriety situation, but if you're out of that,
it's a rhetorical question, Jacoby. It doesn't need an answer.
I'm answering the question on your rhetorical.
It's a rhetorical question. It doesn't need an answer.
Question multiple times, and now you're saying it's rhetorical. I guess you don't understand the definition. Then
I don't understand the definition of rhetorical. Please educate me, Jacoby.
Question. So then you didn't accept Dan's answer, you didn't accept Adam's answer, and you keep going back to it. And
sure
then
no,
it's not that I don't accept their answer. I disagree with them. Jacoby, hang on, Jacoby.
Just to point out,
Jacoby, just hang on a second.
Hey,
I just want to say, I disagree with Dan. Just to point out. He does this. He does this every time. He will never, ever let it acquiesce to me. Never, ever.
I'm a horrible person. I suck.
This is well. Stop recording, Mark.
Stop that.
I just wanted to say one thing, and then you just interrupt me. And so I just wanted to close it out by saying, okay, in the sports world, the high-balling player that makes a lot of money can meet somebody who's just normal. I see it happen all the time.
Just ask
And
Magic
in
Johnson.
the sports world, there are things to worry about. But as long as you're not a dick, and as long as you're not
as long as you
trying
don't
to
have
get
one,
in and
right?
sex, you'll be just fine, just like you meet anybody else.
Okay.
So
Well,
you're
thank
dating
you.
the
Thank you for
Shaq.
sharing that with
You
us.
make these millions of dollars and can't find somebody your own weight class and trying to find somebody less, and you're worried about these allegations that you may run into since you make the billions and billions of dollars. Just talk to the person. Be you, Shaq.
Jacoby, first of all,
Let them
firstly,
belly.
right, I don't have an issue in finding women. Thank you very much. Secondly, if I did, I certainly would not come to you for dating advice.
I'm
That's
glad.
Now, I would also just say it's not that I'm not accepting the answers from Adam and Dan. The reason why they haven't come back at me to try to explain everything like you have is because what they recognize is that I am actually disagreeing with them. Not that I'm not accepting them, what they've said, but I am disagreeing with what they've said. And that's how a conversation goes. And that's why I am able to have conversations about nuanced points of the law especially with Adam. And I can talk about other subjects with Dan. And we don't agree a lot of the time, and that becomes a great exchange of ideas. Okay, so the fact that you can't handle that exchange of ideas furthers exactly the same point that I said before.
You guys are missing.
It furthers the same point that I said before, right? I don't need to. I'm not going to go to some club, in the suburbs, at some poor neck of the woods, drive my Bentley down there, pull my black card out, and then chat up the 18-year-old girl whose parents are on the dole. Okay, I'm not going to do that because I'm well aware that is going to put me in a precarious position. However, if what you're saying is all I've got to do is just go and talk to her, you know what? You'd be so pleased that you'll never have these issues, right?
Well, the solution to this problem, as I've always said, as the song says, you want to make sure you date or marry someone who is extremely ugly. I once went out with a girl. She was called a two-bagger. You went out with her. You wore a bag over your head in case the bag over her head broke.
Adam,
That is from Rodney Dangerfield. I will not play
too hard.
Rodney Dangerfield.
Horrible.
Well,
Adam, I've worked too hard.
Rodney Dangerfield said it there, not me.
Rodney.
I've worked too hard for this ugly face and this fat body to want to have someone that looks like me, right? I want the model, and she can have a nice life with the diamond necklaces, right? I think it's a fair trade-off.
You can have the model
All
and
about
everything.
respect.
We're getting ready to wrap up the show. The thing I was
And
here to say that I
model.
did not get to, which hopefully we'll get to on
All
Monday
you have to
and
do
everything,
is
just
treat
to
women
prepare
with
you, Adam,
courtesy,
because
respect, and
one of
dignity.
the
Exactly.
Hey, just
Exactly.
really quickly, the thing I didn't get to that hopefully we'll get to on Monday, but this discussion became very interesting around rape culture and all along those lines and women's rights and a number of other things.
What's this rape culture? I always love this. What's the rape culture? This culture, this majority of men that are just going around going, oh, wouldn't it be great to hold her down? I mean, what's this rape culture? There is no rape culture. What rubbish.
Well, like I said, Rick used the term, and I just said that I was reporting what he used and everything like that. There's a definition that people use. I'm not going to go into what that definition means. That would be a whole nother show, and we can have a whole other show about that. But on Monday, on the Monday show, because we got guests on Tuesday and Wednesday, but on Monday, I may come back to this notion of family dichotomy and responsibility, because that was the other podcast that I found very interesting, with this notion that Mr. Kelce, Jason Kelce, doesn't have to be responsible for his own kids, and that became a whole podcast economy, because apparently his wife, when she's working and doing her podcast, she's got to do childcare, but she's also going to bring in childcare when he's doing his stuff and everything.
Mark,
So,
Well, unfortunately, I won't be there on Monday because this will be the last time that you see me for a little while. I'm not even sure that I'll be back before Christmas because
Happy
I'm
birthday,
flying
Shaq.
away.
Good seeing you, man.
Thank you very much. I'm flying away. I'm flying away in a couple of hours, so I'll be gone celebrating and partying on because one of my family members' wives and wife and daughter actually have flown to Australia, so I'm going over there and I'm going to have a blast while I'm there. So yeah, I'm not sure that you'll see me before the end of next week. So please do let our audience know and us what the plan is over the Christmas, New Year's break as well, so we know what shows that you'll have. and
I'll
what you won't.
definitely do that. And the other thing I was going to get to, that you, Adam, and everything, and maybe we can do that on Monday as well, is this notion of grocery prices may not come down. I mentioned that in the news because even Trump said that he may not be able to bring them down in his administration. I know that was one of your issues.
Yeah.
But he might be able to increase the amount of wages that people earn.
Drill, baby, drill.
We're already producing the most oil and drilling the most. But Mark, if possible, if we do another show around, sexual abuse and stuff like this, if we could have somebody maybe in the Battered Women's Center, we need women on this show to talk about this topic rather than men just sitting here arguing about an issue that is very, very involved.
Let me reword that for you, Mark. What Jacoby wants is he wants to make sure that men who are worried about the issues of false allegations will be too polite to actually say something. So he wants to bring in reinforcements that'll back up his points and his statistics.
No, Shaq, I think that in this situation, when we're talking about either sexual assault, false allegations, whatever, a woman being on the show could help, because
I
what
agree.
you're actually saying is that you don't want to listen to anything that disagrees with your position.
No, I don't think he's saying that. And let's be fair. I think you're right. Good to have a woman on the show.
We gotta get on that.